President Trump is quietly signaling to China that Taiwan is back on the menu for Xi Jinping. Just why is the president suddenly backing away from supporting Taiwan while he negotiates with the Chinese Communist Party? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so we've talked about the fact that President Trump is currently in negotiations with the Chinese regarding a whole host of trade issues. This is, by the way, the third sort of iteration of these talks. And what's worth noting is that essentially every time this has happened, the Trump administration believes they've agreed to a framework, and then the Chinese go back and say, actually, guys, there's more conditions we need you to meet. And in classic Trump administration fashion, no amount of backstabbing will break their naivete. They're totally convinced the Chinese are definitely good faith negotiators. And so in an effort to show good faith, one way, of course, the Trump administration is declined to approve an military aid package for Taiwan, right? This is ahead of the summit in Beijing. So again, what's worth noting is that Trump continues his negotiating tactic of simply granting the other person concessions before negotiations have even really started. And we've seen how this played out with Vladimir Putin, who interpreted those actions as weakness by the Trump administration when he said, for example, unilaterally that the U.S. would never allow Ukraine to join NATO. But he's now done this with a military aid package for the independent island of Taiwan. Now, the U.S. has supported Taiwan literally since the 1950s as a bulwark against the Chinese expansion. But more importantly, because Taiwan now is an incredibly valuable economic partner, particularly because it's home to TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. And so having U.S. semiconductors manufactured in the independent island and of Taiwan, someone we have a deep, longstanding alliance with, is pretty important to both the U.S. economy and to U.S. foreign policy. So it is troubling to do this, but there's a deeper signal here, right? Because you may note that here's a Fox News article from 2024, December of 2024. China is warning the U.S. to stop arming Taiwan after Biden approves military aid, right? China called this military aid dangerous moves by providing Taiwan with defense materials. Of course, the Biden administration went ahead and did it anyway. It says even Fox News admits the sales and assistance from the U.S. are intended to help Taiwan defend itself and deter China from launching an attack. They quote the Chinese Foreign Ministry. And right, these funds were on top of even additional funds provided to the Chinese government. Now, the takeaway even from, again, this article is that in some ways, this is almost critical of the Biden administration, and perhaps saying that this was like inflammatory or something. It's very strange. But the reality is that this is also a signaling device, right? And this is the real story here, I think. So if you're Xi Jinping, and you know that in the U.S. political system, the president can't come out and say we're abandoning our ally, someone we're treaty bound to defend. And the Chinese have said we're going to invade Taiwan. They have every single year for the last, again, 80 years or however long it's been, since at least the 1950s. And so how do you know then, if the president can't come out and say we won't defend Taiwan, how do you know that the U.S. won't defend Taiwan, particularly, or if the U.S. is willing to capitulate Taiwan? Well, these are the kind of actions that you would see. You would see, for example, military assistance to Taiwan diminish, even as Chinese threats ramped up. That, to someone like Xi Jinping, would be viewed as a signal that the U.S. has no interest in defending Taiwan. And that is something that is that is a signal that the Chinese are in danger of receiving. And given the fact that we've talked about the fact Xi Jinping has identified 2027 as the year he wants to be ready to invade Taiwan militarily. Now, it's not clear that that's possible. It's very difficult to conduct these kind of landing operations, but the Chinese are absolutely laser focused on it, right? The entire Chinese military, inferior as it is to the United States military, remember, they are also don't need to do what the U.S. military does, which is sort of everything. They need to do one thing really well, and that is seize Taiwan. In fact, they have, for example, in the Chinese on Chinese military bases, they actually have mock-ups of the Taiwanese capital. Let's see if I can find it here. Yeah, there we go. Here is literally a mock-up of the key area of Taiwan's capital city as a desert training site. There's the Chinese military training site, and there is the key government quarter of Taiwan itself, right? You can see it's got this really distinctive kind of convergence, three-way convergence roadway here. And again, you're looking at this main government building here in the center square. So that's the level of commitment that we see from the CCP to take Taiwan. And the bigger problem that I think that the U.S. risks with Taiwan is that every time the U.S. abandons an ally like this, it reduces their credibility. And what I mean by that is that if you are another ally of the United States, you are sitting there going, man, if the U.S. meets with my enemy, they are going to capitulate to them. They're going to sell us out. And if you're the Taiwanese, you're going to say, listen, we can't have the U.S. government sell us out. And so what are they going to have to do? They're going to have to find other allies. They're going to have to do favorable trade deals with perhaps countries like Russia or India, China, South Korea. Other sort of like-minded countries are going to have to go their own way. And this is bad for a variety of reasons, but the danger is, again, one, the Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Chinese are going to take this as a signal to say, listen, the Taiwanese, they're all yours, buddy. We're done helping them out. And now the Trump administration's stance, or at least Trump's personal stance, is that the U.S. no longer gives away military assistance. Instead, we now have a policy of making countries pay for the assistance we give them. And that is kind of dumb because it doesn't understand the fundamental nature of defense, right? Like the U.S. Army, a typical U.S. Army unit doesn't make any money. It doesn't exist as a money-making enterprise. It is a collective defense of the country. And when we pay taxes, that is us paying for a service. It's not, it doesn't make sense it's not a free market thing, right? There are some things, like it's like cops. The cops are not a free market service. You don't get to buy your police premium plus subscription. So defense is the same way. We all chip in. We all have this thing that protects the country, and it protects the country's interests. Like, I don't know, our interest in having most of our chips manufactured by a friend. So when we give Taiwan this military assistance, that's not how to think of it. Because again, what we do is we use US tax dollars to purchase weapons, and then we take those US weapons and we put them in Taiwan, and the Taiwanese operate them. We just say, hey, instead of paying US soldiers to do it, why don't we put our defensive armaments in your country and your soldiers use them? So think of it again, like think of it as contracting out, operating our defense stuff. So why can this not be understood, right? This is simple, right? The president, for example, maybe hires contractors to clean his buildings, but he doesn't make the contractors pay for the right to win the contract. That's corruption. And maybe he does. I don't know, but I've never heard allegations to say that. But again, this is increasingly a signal to aggressive global powers that the U.S., as the ultimate arbiter and peacemaker in the world, is abandoning its obligation. And this isn't my way of saying that U.S. defense spending is totally at a reasonable level. It actually is, though, because the war in Iraq and Afghanistan ended, and we had about a 50% drop in our total defense spending. But the U.S. president is signaling that being a U.S. ally is a liability, not an asset. Anyway, guys, if you want to help out one of our allies, the Ukrainians, well, I'm working with Ukraine Aid Ops to do a huge fundraiser for units fighting out in Kramatorsk. These are Ukraine's elite units, including many that I've met personally, the 93rd, Lyut, even the 79th, and some of the Special Operations Forces. It's a crazy time out there, and we are doing our best to help them out. If you're in the US, it's actually a 501c3 charity, and we have a anonymous donor who has pledged to match every dollar that we've raised. They are going to match dollar for dollar. So check the link in the description, and a huge thank you to our Colonel tier members over on Combat Vet News. Michael Fry, Christian Schumann, Chris Holmes, Deborah Oppenheimer, Yanko Georgiev, Bastian Himmerling, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. We couldn't do it without you guys. See ya. Cheers.